All right, everybody. Looks like it's 10 o'clock. Good morning. Hope everybody is doing well. I'm going to throw it over to Matt for a few ground rules, and then we'll get things rocking.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all healthy. Just a few things for this morning's webinar. If you guys have any issues and need to troubleshoot any technical problems, please use the chat feature, and I will do my best to help you. Please be aware that our past several webinars, any issues that have come up have been generally due to Wi-Fi connection, so there might only be so much I can do, but if you put them in the chat function, I will do my best. Throughout the webinar, unless you have questions, please keep your microphone muted so there isn't any background noise. However, if you do have questions, you can either use the chat function and I will prompt Mike and Steve, or they had said it's all right if you unmute yourself and just jump in to ask the question as well. There is one button I'd like you all to avoid hitting on your screens. It says present now. Please do not click that. It will interrupt the presentation that's on the screen. Finally, if there's anyone who has dialed in via phone today, please send me an email at mfrey@pgahq.com. That way we can make sure you get your MSR credits for today. That is all I have. With that, I'll send it back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everybody. Once again, hope everybody's safe and healthy at home. Just to give you a little bit of an update on what's happening with the section and with golf. Obviously, Delaware's been operating since all of this went down. From a Pennsylvania standpoint, those of you that are there saw the governor's press conference and phased plan for opening up last week. Last week, we did send a letter to the governor's office, all the allied associations about opening up golf. We hadn't heard anything back specifically on that. And then at the end of the week last week, we started working with Senator Kurtz on proposing a bill this week into the Senate and the House, the House and the Senate in PA, specifically about opening up golf. So we're helping them with the wording on that bill, and you know, he thinks that that's going to run through the House and the Senate pretty quickly once it gets introduced. No telling if the governor would then veto it once it got to his desk, but we are working as hard as we can to get that done. And then in New Jersey, we've worked with the allied associations in New Jersey from the start of all this, and there was a letter last week sent to Governor Murphy in New Jersey. So we'll see what happens there. There's, you know, there were a lot of rumors flying around about Pennsylvania last week, and there's some more rumors flying around about New Jersey this week. So hopefully some of that will crack here in the very near future. So again, hope everybody's safe and healthy at home. We'll get things rolling. So a big thank you to these two gentlemen on the screen, Mike Mack, Steve Sieracki. Mike and Steve reached out when they saw the education that we were doing and wanted to jump on board and help out. So, you know, sitting in front of you, you have a past president of the section and a golf professional of the year. On the left there, Mr. Mike Mack, and on the right, you have our 2016 Youth Player Development Award winner, also Best Young Teachers in America and Best Teachers in the State, 17, 18, and 19, respectively, with Mr. Steve Sieracki. So without further ado, gentlemen, thanks for your time. We're going to pass the helm over to you, and appreciate the help.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our seminar. We want to keep this kind of very, very, very relaxed. So if you want to jump in and ask any questions when we're going over different pieces that we do with our students, don't hesitate. It'd be fine. So you heard Jeffrey talk a little bit about Steve. I'm going to start just by telling you a little bit about him. I've worked with Steve for years. We've done a lot of schools together, a lot of elite junior camps together. So we've been teaching together a long time, so we know how each other thinks. So we thought this might be a good fit for us, is to get together, kind of give you our thoughts. We're not saying we're right. We're just saying what works for us. We're not going to get into any discussions on what the correct theory is, what isn't, because I think all theories are basically correct. So you're basically going to see a bunch of pictures, and Stevie's going to do a lot of talking about what we do to change path. We're going to stay basic what we see basically every day with our lessons, which is basically over the top, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we call it how to recognize common patterns. Okay. We would certainly welcome if we get later into this presentation and you want to get into, I'm sure most of you on the other end, if you need some advice, you're struggling being too much under the plane, more than likely. That seems to be the common mistake for the good players. We can certainly get into that. But what we're going to focus on today is basically the common patterns we see in our lessons and just express to you how we fix it. And, we both have had a lot of success. I'm sure we had some failures too. But so if we can help you at all, and if you have any questions, just jump in. But I think at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Steve. He's going to go through some spectrums of pictures so you can see kind of what we do, the results we get, and we'll talk through it with everybody. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask them.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So we have basically just five common patterns that Mike and myself thought would be pretty much basic and what we see every day to our members and clientele. And we just started really with number 1 and number 2, staying centered and having more hip turn. 2, stopping over top and reducing the slice. That's where we're going to start. And then 3, 4, and 5 are all going to be like through the ball pieces, the body, the hips, the upper body, the arms and wrists. These are all going to be kind of tied together. So we'll get started with our first picture that we're going to go over. So here, this is a golfer. On the left is going to be the before. On the right is going to be the after for every picture. So this would be a golfer that came for a lesson, and he had problems with hitting behind the ball, not much power, and didn't have a predictable shot pattern. It was mainly always going to the right. And that would be like how we would grade pretty much every one of our students that we see. What's the contact, number 1? 2 would be, the power, how much power they're creating. And then number 3, what's the direction of the curve? Which way is the ball going? And in this case, like I said, behind, not much power, and bias to the right. And what I drew here, yep.
I'm sorry. Your screen isn't up. Can you hit the present now? Down at the bottom of your screen, if you're in Google Hangouts.
Yep, it says we're sharing.
Can anyone else see the screen? I'm getting no's.
Shaking now.
Yeah. One moment here. Let's see if I can hit stop sharing and then reshare.
Okay.
I think when somebody accidentally shared their screen earlier, it kind of messed you up.
Okay, not a problem.
There you go.
We good?
Now you're cooking with gas.
All right. Okay. So can everyone see that? Can you see this now, Matt?
Start over.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So this would be on the left are all the befores, all the right is going to be the after pictures. And over here on the left, this golfer had a tendency to hit too far behind the ball, didn't have much power, and his shot pattern was biased to the right. And what I drew on these 2 red lines, I drew where the hips were at the setup. And his left hip was on the red line at the setup, and his right was on this red line. And as he swung back, he had a tendency to sway his hips towards the right, which would make the bottom of the swing to have a tendency to be behind the ball, but also reduce the amount of hip and shoulder turn he had. And you can see how short his swing was. So on the right side of the page, the directions that I took in this lesson, where I put this stick down underneath his left heel right here, or this club, and I told him when he swung back to move his hips towards the target, and as he did that, to turn them by straightening his right leg and bending his left. And you can see how that helped the hip turn stay centered, which would help make the bottom of the swing potentially more forward. And as he kept turning his hips more, that would allow his shoulders to turn more, which in the blue line, you can see how his shoulders have turned closer to 90 and how his left arm has orbited more degrees around the torso. So I think a big thing that Mike and I like to try to do in our teaching is have one solution where it could fix 2 to potentially 3 problems. And in this case, doing the hip turn and moving his hips forward as he turned made the bottom of the swing more forward, and also the turn made the golfer have potential more power. And lastly, this would also help from the down the line view to have him hit more from the inside. Anything you want to comment on that, Mike?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things I focus on the most in my teaching is I want to control where the club hits the ground. I mean, to me, that's simply the most important thing in the golf swing. I mean, we can stand here and it's fun to discuss backswings and philosophies and all that kind of stuff. But in reality, to make our golfers better, which is all we're really interested in doing, we're not preparing any of our members to go play the PGA Tour. So, I mean, we can get away with just fixing where the club hits the ground, and they're going to get better immediately the next day. And that's kind of how I focus my teaching. Now, there's numerous things we'll do. Stevie mentioned hip turn. I'm a big believer in that. The tailbone goes toward the target as you turn your hips. And I'm a big believer that you can't turn your hips too much because most of our golfers need power. So I try to wind them up. I call it a pivot. And I'll put an alignment rod on their tailbone and make sure as they go back, their tailbone goes toward the target. And to me, that's extremely important. Go ahead, Stevie.
And I think that's a good part that you just mentioned about, not having enough hip turn, because most of the members that we see, are let's call them middle-aged, and they think they might not be flexible enough to make some of these moves. And we'll show later on in our pictures that if you give them the proper advice and show them how to work their body, they can get more turn than they really thought they could at the beginning.
I agree. And then the other thing I'll add into that, Stevie, is I hear all the time. I mean, I give a bunch of lessons. I hear all the time, oh, I'm not flexible enough to do that.
Yeah,
we'll
go through that.
All you guys out there and girls that know me know I haven't been to the gym since 1978, and I'm not in good shape, and I can still turn my hips way more than 45 degrees in the backswing. So it's not a fitness thing. It really isn't. So I emphasize that with all my students. We want your hips to turn. It's a must. Right. Okay?
So
go ahead, Stevie.
Yeah. So now we'll just, after going through this picture, we'll show this from the down the line view. So same golfer. You can see how, starting with the left picture, there's no space visible between his knees, and you can see how short the swing is. And then once you move over to the right, you can see how I had this stick on the ground, or this club on the ground. And as I told him to turn his hips by flexing the left, straightening the right, his hips would move towards the target, which would allow him to have more hip turn. And that made his hands and arms travel more degrees around his torso for more potential speed. And also this would help the golfer hit this ball a little bit more from the inside. If we had the pictures on the left, he came over the top of pretty much all these balls and hit the majority to the right with not much power. And you can see over here by the evidence in the picture, he'd have a better chance to hit the ball further, higher, and potentially have it curve more from right to left because the hands and arms worked more degrees around the body.
Stevie, let me interrupt you a minute. Yep. So I want to ask you a question. So would you take this golfer? Now you look at his pattern, his pattern was over the top. It was weak. It was an open face. Every shot was a deflection. There certainly wasn't compression. Would you say priority number one would be to get that right hip open? Because I believe that allows for some space for the left arm to stay in more on the downswing.
Absolutely. That would be one of the main things that we did here actually was moving the hips forward. And as he moved them forward, the hips turned more. And that's like we said, keeping the hips centered. And the more turn, the more the hands can work in more, the more the left arm can orbit around the torso. All good things. Yeah,
I agree. I think that's the progression I usually take is if I'm trying to fix an over the top person, I don't usually spend a lot of time on backswing. That's just my philosophy. I don't care if clubs cross the line. I really don't. I might talk a little bit about wrist conditions, but we're going to get into that later into this session. But I'm big on hip turn because it creates space for the left arm to stay in and the club to approach from the inside easier.
Right, you say it works from the ground up. How the legs work, the hips, the shoulders.
The backswing, I agree with that 100%. So go ahead, Stevie.
Yep, we'll go to our next picture. This is one of Mike's favorites right here.
So I have to start this one. So I know this guy, played golf with him, took him to pro-ams, played with him everywhere. His name is Cy. Cy was a horrible guy. Great guy, great to travel with. I mean, he was terrible. I mean, I played with him in places. I mean, I played with him at Cascada in Vegas. He shot 170, I think. That's one round. So Stevie took his member down at Woodcrest, and Stevie took him over. I never gave him a lesson. I didn't think I could help him. I thought he was too far gone. Look what Stevie's done to Cy.
Well,
And he's my buddy. I'm so happy for Cy.
very, very similar pattern to the first golfer, but we attacked this in a little bit different of a way. So, but I want to start from the ground up. I drew on the bottom here the hips in black and the center of the tailbone in white. And then on the yellow, I have the hips, and then I have the center of the tailbone in black. You can see how it slid to the right and hasn't turned that much. And the other proof of this is you can see how the lines, I put black lines on the hips where they were at the setup, and you see they move off the ball to the right. Hips haven't turned in the red. Shoulders haven't turned much in the blue. Can you grab me a club? And then over here, what I had him do in this practice was, if you can see, I had him drop his right foot back. Give me a second. I had him drop his right foot back to have him get the feel of having more hip turn. So you can see how the hips were on the black and they are on the center of the tailbone was on the white, and they moved to the black on the yellow, and how much more degrees the hips have turned. And the analogy that I like to use is, if you have the center of the tailbone right here in the middle, you have the right hip and the left hip, you can turn more degrees around the more forward point. So think about the kid in class who has the pencil. He would take his fist, put it all the way to the end to create a larger moment arm, and he could pull that pencil back and fling the eraser across the classroom. This was the analogy that I gave to Cy here by dropping his foot back and having him move his hips forward so he could create a bigger arm in his hips and have his hips turn more. And you can see how that would affect the shoulder turn, how that affect the left arm to travel more degrees around his body, which would potentially lead to more power, more distance. And just to echo to Mike's point, this guy doesn't really work out, smokes about a pack of cigarettes a day. And he was really scared actually to come take a lesson because he didn't think he was coordinated enough or flexible enough to make some of these movements. And to be honest with you, I was actually shocked he moved as well as he did, as fast as he did, just by doing a couple parts to help with this. And like I said, the big part that I did here to help him is I dropped his right foot back, help him have the sensation to have more hip turn. And as he dropped his foot back, that allowed him to keep his hips more centered or slightly to the left, also to have more hip turn and more shoulder turn. You gonna make any comments?
No, the only comments I'm going to make is I'm trying to anticipate what's going through everybody's mind that's watching this. So I know there's probably some of you out there that are going to say, well, when you do what Stevie did with Cy, well, he can't turn his hips on the through swing. Now, remember, we're working on a over-the-top weak slice pattern, basically.
He swung 12 degrees across the ball.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're not concerned at this point with his hip rotation on through swing. You know, if this guy was a good player, well, then we might be concerned about that. But remember, we're trying to change his pattern, which is grossly left over.
And like you said, we can't emphasize this enough. These are common patterns that we see every day. Our members, our clients, really, I would say most of the players that we're showing you are 15 handicap or higher. And when someone, comes for a lesson and they might say they have all these problems, you can kind of alleviate the conversation just by saying, what's your handicap? If they say their handicap's an 18, you kind of have an idea what their pictures are going to look like. So you can start classifying swings in relationship to their handicap. There's a big correlation there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So now this leads us to our next slide. So the first two we wanted to talk on was really the lower body and keeping really the hip sway centered and how that affects the rest of the swing. Now we're going to get on to the upper part of the body. And I think it's important to define a couple things first. So you can see the original picture where the golfer's head moves down into the right. We'll call this turning inflection. So when you set up, you're bent over. And when you would swing back, as you would swing back and if you just turned while staying bent over, your head would move down and to the right like this golfer. Then in the middle part of this, there's a tilting and an extension that happens. So your golfer turns, the golfer tilts, and the golfer extends. But when you do all three parts coordinated, you'll stay centered like the sixth ball. The original ball, this golfer was turning faster than he was extending and tilting. So you can see as you progress through these set of pictures, the instructions were on the sixth ball, no turn. So Mike and I were telling this guy no turn. We just want him to feel like he was side bending and extending on the backswing. And you can see how that helped him stay more centered, keep his shoulder turn centered, made his swing longer, which would help with the power, which would help with the contact. And once again, I can't go on to emphasize that when we're looking at these pictures, we're always grading him through what's the contact, what's the power, what's the curve of the ball. We're looking at it in that order. And here you can see bottom of the swing would be too far behind the ball by how his head moved almost a foot off the ball, how his backswing is very short, and he didn't have much power. And just by doing the instructions, just tilting and extending, no turn, that kept the shoulder turn centered, that made the swing longer. So once again, you have one solution that would knock out two problems here on this part. To add to this, I know this is a big part in your game.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, so I've worked on this for a long time. I mean, I've always, I don't want to get into personal golf swing stuff, but real quickly, I always have trouble with this. I mean, because I have a tendency to stay in flexion too long on the backswing. Okay, so I've worked on this for a long time, and so it's really close to me. I can really give you some good insight into how I teach it. I think it's a huge thing, and I'm going to give you an example why I think it's a huge thing. If you look at this picture on the left, okay, if you let your golfer swing like that on the backswing, what's he going to do in the downswing to hit the golf ball? Well, there's only one thing he can do. He's going to early extend. He's going to have to slide like crazy forward to keep the club from crashing into the ground.
Right.
So he's going to have another fault in his golf swing that you'll be fixing later down the road if you don't fix the we'll call it the neck tilts and the spine angles and stuff on the backswing. So one of the things that I do, and I don't know, I'm going to do a quick get up here and show you something. I'm going to use that mouse a minute, Stevie.
Well, I got to stop sharing the screen so I can see it.
Oh, go ahead. Stop sharing the screen. Go ahead.
Yep.
So I want to just show you something really quick, and the way I explain this to students where they can get it really in like one or two swings. Everybody see me now?
Yeah, you're good, Mike.
I'm good?
Yeah.
Who's that guy I'm seeing?
You're good. Okay.
Oh,
You're good. Everyone's good.
Matt, we good?
Yes.
You mean?
Yeah.
So when we talk about turning, tilting, and extending, I know that sounds really technical, but it's really simple. Okay, if I'm using a pen, you can use anything with your students. I use alignment rods sometimes too. Okay, matter of fact, I'm going to grab an alignment rod. It's more visible. Okay, so put an alignment rod on your sternum, upper center, right? Explain to your students if they want to stay centered, which I think is extremely important. Okay, I'm not going to get into weight, pressure, and all this kind of stuff. I'm just going to say keeping your upper body centered. Okay, is when you go back, the angle that your sternum is set up at, it doesn't stay that way to the top of the swing. It has to extend. So basically what I have them do, and I might even strap a strap around their upper body and put something out of it so they can see this, okay? It turns up. Okay, so your sternum actually turns up
Towards the sky.
I'm not going to say, well, Stevie said toward the sky. That's an exaggeration, but at least perpendicular behind you, at the wall behind you. So you're here, it has to be there. That's how we keep our students centered. And that really, if you think about it, okay, because we can get into all different philosophies, and I'm sure there's people on here that have different philosophy than me, but controlling the bottom where the club hits the ground, really staying centered is a huge part of that. Okay, so that's just a couple things I wanted to point out.
Hey guys, in relation to that slide you had up with the different swings, Ben Debsky asked how many lessons would it normally take to see that amount of change?
One.
Just one?
Yeah, I mean, you can, I'll go to that. So the point, that's a great question, is to show the student that they can start making these changes in only a couple of balls, where you can see how this was the sixth ball that it took to get this change. It encourages the student to want to practice. And the fact that they can see progress like this excites them. So when they take their phone out, or if they're at home, they have an idea of what to practice. They know in this case, the instructions were no turn, side tilt, and extend. So we know if he does A plus B, we get C. So if he wants to keep his shoulder turn centered, his directions were side, bend, and extend, and that's going to help him hit more forward on the ground. If he has a tough time hitting behind the ball, he knows exactly why he's hitting behind the ball. He knows he was staying bent over and turning inflection. And I think that this should happen fairly fast if the student's given the right advice. And an analogy I like to use all the time is if you go to the doctor's office and you're sick, the doctor runs through a series of tests, asks you questions, then he prescribes you the proper medicine. When you take that medicine and you go home, within the first hour or two, you start to feel a little bit better. Then after a while, you keep taking the medicine, you feel better. What could happen is they could end up taking the whole bottle of medicine and start overdoing this. So potentially this golfer could come back and his head could be forward. It's rare that that happens, but I have seen that from case to case. And just going back to the question is that it shouldn't take long at all with prescribed the right directions in the beginning of the lesson. Comment to that?
Well, I'm the one that answered one lesson right away, and I'll even say it could be within 10 minutes of the lesson, because I'm a big believer in, and that's just my philosophy. I don't know how everybody out there feels, but I'm a person that grabs the student and I put him where I want him. So I'm a big fan of what I would do with this guy. Okay, is I would take him, and I can show you some other things I do. If you're interested, we'll do it later. I'm not going to stop sharing and do that again now. Okay, but I would grab this guy's shoulders from in front of him. I would have him turn and tilt as he does that. And I would literally create an arch in his back at the top. So it would hurt him. It probably hurt his back a little bit for a moment. I want him to feel it. And I'll have him stand there as long as he can. So it's in his mind. And that's how he'll change his pattern.
Right.
So I'm a big grabber. I'll grab someone. I'll move them. You know, if I don't like how their hips are working, I'm going to make those work. And then I'll take pictures of that, show them. Right. Send it to them immediately so they have it to look for, you know, and then we'll get this down in 10 minutes, really, to someone.
What was was it one lesson for Cy as well, he asked?
Those pictures were a week apart.
A week apart.
Just to piggyback onto Mike's point of what he's trying to say is we're controlling the environment. Mike's moving the golfer around. We have this camera. We're telling him, no, come over here. Look, here's the picture. You need to feel more of what we're saying. So we'll keep on filming, check the camera, filming, check the camera. We're using the camera as a learning tool to show them what they need to feel to make the picture change faster. And sometimes they wouldn't even believe how much they would feel to make this thing move this much.
Oh yeah, feeling real is
it's crazy. That's why the camera's huge.
For a guy like this, if I was giving him individual lesson, I think this was one of our clinics, wasn't it, Stevie?
Yeah.
If I was giving him an individual lesson, I would have already, to get him from picture on the left, my left, I don't know what you guys see it as, to the picture on the right, the before and afters, I would have probably already sent him at least 6 comparison pictures to his email, so he has a complete record of what he's trying to accomplish and the stages in which he accomplished it. You know what I'm saying?
That shows him how to practice on his own.
You know, so that's what I would do with this guy, Matt, and that's how I would get this in a short period of time.
John Rudolph asked if you get concerned with the upper body leaning towards the target at the top of the swing, possibly causing a reverse pressure shift in the downswing and actually creating a low point behind the ball.
Oh boy, I was waiting for somebody to go there. I'm going to stay away from pressure shifts because I'm not even going to get into it. I'm just going to say to John, I know you're a good teacher. I can assure you I've been doing this for a very long time, and it does not produce a reverse pressure shift. Even though maybe some of the scientists would say it does, I don't know any scientists that play tournament golf. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to be a smartass. I'm just going to leave it at that. Most of you know me, and I am a smartass. So, John, I'm not going to go there. I don't believe it will. I believe that staying centered will not cause a reversed pressure shift. Just my opinion. Don't hate me for it.
Go to Go to or towards the next slide.
Any other questions, Matt?
There was one about sharing the pictures with the students, but I think you answered that one.
I won't share them with this amount of detail. This is more for, I make these for my understanding, and to do things like this, I'll send them, you know, like a couple before and afters with a couple notes, not to the extent of this detail.
No, what I do is I'll send it side by side and I'll put lines on it because I'm using my V1 on my iPad. So it's so simple to just put a comparison. You can do it in 20 seconds. You do a comparison, put a couple lines, show them where they were, where we are now, send.
That's all.
Okay.
What was that noise, Matt?
Somebody had their microphone on. I muted the person.
All right, so we'll go to the next picture. Here is a golfer that actually had a combination of both the hips and the upper body. So starting on the left, I put a box on his hips like I have been in the past. You can see how the hips have actually swayed to the right, and his knee, this is a rare one, his knee actually increased flex on the backswing. So what I mean by that is, say when he set up, he had 25 degrees of right knee flex. When he went back, it increased to say 30, where it should really decrease or lose flex. It should be set at 25 and then start going like to 20 and the 15. So he moved his hips, swayed him to the right, kept his knee bent, increased the knee flex, and his head was in the yellow box and then went down to the right in the blue. And you can see how short the swing is. This right here is a practice swing in the middle. You can see how the legs extended, which allowed the hips to turn more, and how the head stayed centered where it was originally in the yellow box. You can see how much longer the swing is. So the directions were straighten the right leg, and what, like Mike was just saying, extend and tilt your spine to the left. And that's what helps keep the head centered. Where over here, he kept his head down and to the right. So his spine actually stayed bent over. And because his spine stayed bent, because he stayed flexed, and as he stayed flexed and turned, the head moved down and to the right. So the directions were straighten the trail leg, extend and tilt your spine to the left to stay centered. And then over here on the right, I've actually overlaid both of the pictures on top of one another, and you can see how much longer the golf swing got. And you can also see how the hips have stayed more centered. So where they were at a dress before were in the black, see they moved to the right. And the after where they are, they're in the red and they're more centered. Any comments on that, Mike?
Yes. I mean, yeah, that's good stuff, Stevie. I mean, one of the things I would do, you know, and Stevie and I, we teach a lot of the same things. We have a lot of the same philosophies, but we may have different ways to get people to do it. What I would do with this golfer is I would ask him to take his belt buckle. You know, the example I gave you earlier where I changed the screen, put the alignment rod on my sternum. Well, I would put, imagine, I'm not going to do it again. Alignment rod, sternum, alignment rod on the belt buckle.
Yeah, through his belt loops.
I would ask him to turn his belt buckle up to the sky on his backswing, and that would allow him to turn his hips better in a circle and not bumping to the right. Okay, and it will also help him extend his pelvis, which, you know, I'm not saying straighten it, I'm saying extend it,
right? Which
will create a little bit more, little torque, a little bit more pivot, and it'll make the ball go further.
Yeah, more potential power.
Yeah.
And to add to Mike's point is it's a very similar or almost the same thing as straightening the trail leg, just saying it a little bit differently by putting the alignment rod right through the belt loops. So you could feel it that way. You could feel it just by straightening the trail leg, which I did in this picture, but both instances would get the golfer to make the change, to hit the ball a little bit farther, and to have more hip turn. And once again, I'd like to go to the point of this was an older gentleman who didn't think he was flexible enough to turn his body. And once we showed him the pictures and showed him a couple of the steps that we needed to take, it was very easy to start making these changes during our golf school.
I mean, one of the things I'll add to that is what I try to get students to feel to get a better pivot or a better hip turn. I use the word pivot a lot, but is I'll try to get them to feel like their right butt cheek goes back towards behind them. In other words, I'll do things like I might put a wall behind them. I might put a chair behind them, and I'll have them practice their backswing pivot by pushing the chair or just putting pressure on the wall. I want them to feel like their right glute is pushing that chair out of the way, if you all can picture that. Maybe later when we flip screen, I'll show you that. But that's a good drill I give my students to get them to pivot and use their hips correctly.
Talk about the alignment rod one you were telling me the other day, where you put the alignment rod by his right hip and you stand behind him.
Yeah, I mean, so what I do, and you gotta imagine this because we share screen, it kind of slows things down. But okay, I'll have people hit shots where I'm on my knees behind them, holding an alignment rod on their hip. Okay, and I ask them to try to create space toward the target at the top of their swing. And of course, I cheat. I push it toward them as they're going back to make them exaggerate it, because exaggeration is really the way to learn. I mean, you can't do it if you don't exaggerate it. So I'll put an alignment rod down there. I'll get down on my knees behind them. I'll have them hit balls, and I'll make them. And if they don't do it, hey, listen, I'll just push their hips forward as they turn. I'll just give them a bump, and it works. I mean, believe me, once you get them to feel it, they get it.
So we'll transition to the next slide in a second. Just wanted to go over, once again, these are very basic common patterns that we see every day on the lesson tee, with doing how the hips work, by the legs flex changing, how to keep the head centered by the three parts of the spine, the turning, the tilting, and the extending. And now we're going to start touching on a little bit of the downswing. Okay, so picture on the left is a golfer that sliced the majority of all the balls. And there'd be a few things that I'd be looking at here. First would be where the left arm is when it's parallel to the ground. And what I've drawn here on the ground is I have these dots, or sorry, these lines. I have a black, an orange, a blue, and a yellow, representing different positions where the left arm can be when it's parallel to the ground. And then over here on the left, I have it coordinated with, say, just call it different planes. So you have the black being the most from the inside, the orange, the blue, the yellow being the most over the top. You could see here how this golfer has his left arm, we'll call it just outside the blue, not quite to the yellow, and that would be right where his shaft's coming down. So you can see his shaft's like dissecting his neck, how steep that is. And then you could also take a look at how open the club face is to that shaft. And the steps actually that I practiced with this golfer was, the first thing that I did, his setup was pretty bad from the front with his grip. We just touched up the grip really quick just to help keep the face closed. Then the second part I did was we started hitting balls. And I held this stick here, right where this blue line would be, and I'd have him swing underneath the stick. And him having that awareness of how low his arm needed to be, and we'd say we did 5-10 balls, that helped him really feel how in the left arm needed to be on the backswing and on the downswing. So this is another part that we're talking about, how to control the learning environment. We use our camera, we'll put sticks on the ground or in the air to help them get the sensation of the feel. And you could see how now his left arm is over top of the orange, we'll say the orange line. And you can see how that would be equivalent to where the shaft would be on this stick figure, how the shaft would be a little bit lower. So the shaft on the before picture was dissecting his neck when his arm was parallel to the ground. Now the shaft is going through the mid to base part of his humerus. The other thing I'd like to point out is how the face is more close to the shaft. And the evidence is obviously the face. And you can see how the Titleist logo in his grip is like facing towards me and it's not cupped. So there's a little bit more, I'll call it palmar flexion or bowing of his left wrist. And that was like the last piece that we did. So once again, we touched up the grip first, put this stick over here to help him get a sensation of keeping his arm and his shaft in on his downswing. And then to keep adding to the grip, taught him how to keep palmar flexing or closing his face more in his downswing. And really doing the grip and the setup helped this sensation. And then the other part was just having him feel like his arm was a little bit in more coming down. And the result of some of these shots were more balls that curved to the left and more distance. And there'd be two parts to go with the more distance part. The first would be having the club in more around him and behind him. An example I know Mike and I like to talk about is using a field goal kicker. When a field goal kicker kicks, and they can kick from 60 yards now, they stand to the side of the football. They take their foot in an arc, and their foot's moving into out. Whereas before, Mike, right, they would just stand straight on, and it couldn't kick it more than, 30, 40 yards?
Well, unless you were Tom Dempsey, you had metal in your shoe.
Right. So having the shaft here helped do two things. Help the golfer swing a little more from the inside, stop slicing. Second, it helped them hit the ball a little bit farther, creating more angular momentum. And lastly, changing the grip would turn his, I think this was a 7-iron, would make his 7-iron actually hit with a 7-iron loft, whereas before he was almost hitting it with, say, a 9-iron loft with how open the face was. So any comments you want to make on to that, Mike?
Well, I think you touched on it. We're going to get into this later. I think wrist conditions, and Stevie talked about palmar flex or bowing, whatever you want to call it, I think was a huge thing to improve this young man Stevie worked with. Because if you just changed path and you didn't change wrist conditions, it's going to go right to right. He's not going to make the change. So I think that's something we're going to get into pretty much quite a bit here in a little while. So the point that I would take from what Stevie just said is, I hold this club like there's another picture. I think is the next picture the kid so in this next picture we can show you is a kid that basically for the first 10 or 20 swings he made, I didn't move that club from where Stevie has it.
Right.
So I'm a big believer in Stevie calls it controlling the environment. That's too technical a phrase for me. I just call it sticking clubs up. But I try to control where the club goes by either moving them around or putting up clubs or noodles or things like that. So, what Stevie has on that picture on my right with that club there, that's invaluable to change a person's path. Invaluable.
Yeah. And that stick that I have, or the club, what that's representing is this orange and black line on the ground to have them swing more from the inside. And we'll get to those, some more detail on that as we go through. So now, Mike, this was yours. I think this was the other day.
Yeah, this is just a young man that just started playing golf.
Very similar pattern to the other golfer.
See the picture on the left? That wasn't his first swing. His first swing, that shaft was probably above his ear.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so he just started. Yeah, and he doesn't have a whole lot of athletic ability. So this happened in maybe 10 minutes. And like I said to you a minute ago, the picture on my right where it's a better shaft angle coming down, it isn't great, but it's better. Okay, it was accomplished by, as Stevie called, control the environment. Put a golf club there behind the golfer, behind his trail side at the angle you want to put it at. And then what I do is as he hits more and more balls, I lower the golf club to make it more difficult for him to keep the left arm in, keep the shaft coming from under a little bit, and
so once again, goes back to the point of our presentation. Another common pattern we see the left arm too far out, the shaft too steep, dissecting the neck, and the face being a little bit open from time to time, depending on the golfer. And you can see just by doing the touch maybe of the grip or the wrist, and by doing that shaft, you can knock out a couple things right away. I
think all of our viewers, I'm sure you'll all agree. We're never going to agree on philosophy together, okay? But we will agree that this is by far our normal lesson. This is what we see day in, day out with golfers, whether they're young, middle-aged, old, it doesn't matter. They struggle with shallowing the shaft. That's the new buzzword in golf, shallowing the shaft. So, we know that our students struggle with doing that, okay?
Okay, so now to our next picture. It's one of my favorites.
Hey, everybody out there, how do you think he hit that one on the left, on my left? Do you think he hit that golf ball? I keep telling Stevie he couldn't hit it. He said, no, he hit it.
It wasn't very good, though.
Oh, of course it wasn't very good. Look at that thing. I've never seen a club head that far outside coming down. That's got to be 28 to the left.
It was a lot.
And if he stood at the right distance from the ball, it might be 42 to the left.
So we just talked about when the left arm was parallel to the ground. These pictures are covering when the shaft is parallel to the ground. And obviously what Mike just said over here on the left picture, you can see how the club's way outside the hands, the face angle's very open. and this ball did not go very far and clearly went to the right. So the steps really that I took here were similar to the last picture. I did put a shaft through or underneath his shoulder to have him feel like he was swinging more from the inside. Also, what I did was I drew, you can see the spray painted lines on the ground. What I drew here is I just drew a couple arcs on the ground, this representing where his hand should move on the backswing, this representing where his club would move. And the analogy that I made was to him to help give him some orientation for how the hands and club need to move. As I talked to him about, when you get in your car and you go to drive to work, there's lines on the road. There's lines, and then when you pull into the parking lot, there's lines in the parking lot. There's an organized way for you to drive, and you don't really realize it, but it's there, and it helps you guide your way through. And that's how I explained this to him. I'm spray painting these lines in the ground. At the time, he thought they were very complicated, but I started to explain to him how this is how you want to take your hands in and around you, take your club in and around you. It would help on the downswing do the same thing, keep the hands in and keep the club in. Once we had this conversation, we started practicing some more, and the cues that I were giving him were how to keep his right wrist bent back more. That would help keep the shaft and the club head in more. And then the other cue was I was teaching him how to palmar flex or flatten his left wrist to keep closing the face to the path. And the progression as we went through this, you can see how each picture, the club head gets slightly more and more behind him, and the club face starts to get more and more closed. So as you go from the beginning picture all the way on the left to the picture all the way on the right, you can see how the club's like the most behind his hands. Well, and probably move 2 feet, maybe 2-3 feet from the original picture. This would help him hit the ball a little bit farther, more angular momentum. Also, by having the wrist conditions right, would help close the face and take the loft off the club, less spin loft, help him have more ball speed by not necessarily swinging faster. And lastly, by having the right wrist bent more, would help him have the handle more forward and impact to help him hit this ball more from the inside. So anything you want to add to these?
Yeah, you covered it pretty good. I mean, I would do the same thing. I typically, when I'm giving a lesson to a person that has this pattern, although I've never seen anybody with that, that's the most I've ever seen. So I will just leave it at that. But I would put a alignment rod down where I want his hands to go inside of.
Yep.
I'm a big believer in controlling hand path, not club head. Okay, so I would control his hand path by putting an alignment rod underneath his hands and say, look, you're in the rest of the lesson. I don't ever want your hands to swing above or to the outside of that alignment.
Would you say that'd be similar to the last picture, or would you put it a little different? Like the last picture where we had it underneath his shoulder.
Well,
I'm just saying.
I'm giving them the visual, just a visual on the ground.
Gotcha.
I like to set up stations for people when they're practicing, especially when I'm giving lessons, because I'm constantly harping on them about practicing. So I create a station. So I would always have an alignment rod under the golfer's hands. It's set up. Well, always. If we're talking about this pattern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then at the hands, I want them the hands to work in on the backswing. Everything I do from the beginning, if I see this pattern, okay, is about stay in center, get your hips to turn, and keep your left arm in. That's in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen out there. That's how I look at fixing this common pattern. Is pivot properly, left arm in, and
keep the face closed to the shaft.
Well, we'll get into the wrist angles in a little bit.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, we have the wrist up here. Why don't you touch on those a little bit more now?
Well, one of the things that as teachers we have to decide, I believe we'll probably all agree on this, is that so whether we're giving a half-hour lesson or an hour lesson, we have to decide, we have to look at the student, we have to evaluate what his skill set appears to be, what can he comprehend, okay? And some people can't make, I'm not going to say why, because I don't know why. If it's athletic ability, if it's hand-eye coordination, I don't know. But some people can't make some of these changes as quickly. So what I found successful is I have a little thing that I call knuckles down that I use all the time. I mean, if you guys can all picture, and I may show you this later when we change screen, but I put like a big oval on a grip on a golf glove, and I'll have them try to turn their knuckles of their lead hand down to the ground as the club comes down.
Or we'll say logo down.
Logo down, yeah. I mean, to me, if I can change that person's face angle. And yes, I know some of you are probably asking out there in your mind, you're saying, well, why don't you do it on the backswing? And I will do that a little bit too. I'll control on the backswing, whether it's grip or whether it's left arm rotation. I mean, remember, you can control that a little bit with left arm rotation. Okay. But I'm big on, because I think I've seen it work, and that's why I'm big on it. I'm big on controlling the wrist condition, because you can take a golfer really, and again, it might require you actually get up there and flatten his left hand or put it in palm reflection. But okay, once they feel that, it's amazing how quickly they'll do that. You know, you might have a guy that hits the first 20 shots on the lesson, 30-yard slices. And once I get them to feel that, all of a sudden they're going so far left, they're hitting the houses next to my range. But so yeah, I mean, you can fix a face. So I fix face a lot with lessons quick, because I believe if we fix the face, they can fix the path, even if they can't do it that day.
To add on to what Mike just said is, you could start building this draw alignment as soon as you take the club away. And that's what Mike's saying, is you could have this left wrist as soon as you take the club away. Let's call it position 2, when the shaft's parallel to the ground on the backswing. You could start building the face closed to the path, the left wrist down, the right wrist bend. You can put that alignment in right away from the get-go, and then that gives them less chance for them to screw it up in the rest of the swing. That's kind of how I would say it. I think that's what you're trying to say.
I mean, I use that. What's that device? I can't remember the name of it that I use. The
device.
The one I bought, you know, for the wrist thing. What's it called?
I
forget what it's called. They have a device out there that you can buy that is sort of like a K-vest that gives you audible if you keep it.
Oh, Hack Motion.
Hack Motion. I was going to go pick it up and get it. It's over there. I'm getting old. I forget stuff, everybody. But yeah, Hack Motion. I use that a lot. And then that way you can,
that'll help.
At that position, you can train the golfer to have his knuckles down, or whatever you want to call it, palm reflection, whatever you want.
Okay. So now we'll go start. This is where we're going to start touching on a little bit more of the follow through. And this would be, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be kind of blended together, but this is a very, very common pattern. I think we all see, especially if we're filming a lot of our lessons, that arms are bent coming through the ball, or the chicken wing, left wrist is cupped or dorsiflexed. The hips have a tendency to be too far back. So this is definitely a common pattern. Then we can blow this up to really make our point, is it's a real common pattern. I think it's an epidemic in golf, where all golfers really look the same at this point, especially going back to what we said earlier. If your handicap, say it's like a 16 or higher, and they come for a lesson, we know that they're going to potentially fit into this pattern.
Yeah, Stevie, I agree. I mean, you look at this picture on the left, everybody. I mean, I know you're all going to say that's a common look that you get in your students day in, day out. And I have an opinion that if we can make that golfer go from the picture on the left to the picture on the right, the far right, he gets better immediately within that lesson, not like the next day, within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's things we'll get into on how we accomplish that in a minute or two.
So just real quick, I have, 2 golfers from a clinic, and then I have an expert player. And I think it's good to put the poor player together and compare it to an expert player, because then the pattern really is glaring. So I save as many poor swings as I do good ones, just so you can make the comparison of a poor golfer to an expert player, and it really helps you to see the patterns a little bit clearer. Now, to go to this lesson, how we help fix this one, let me just blow this up just a smidge. So here was that golfer on the left that we just saw. And to be a couple things we're seeing here is clearly the arms are too bent in the blue, and how the butt of the club is too close to the stomach with the yellow arrow. Then I drew a line in red, was where his hips were at the setup. You can see how his belt line is still right there, did not raise or extend enough. As you go across the screen, you can see how much straighter the arms are in the blue. You can see how the butt of the club is further away from the stomach with the yellow arrow. And you can see how the hips are raised up above that red line. And the practice here that I did with this golfer was I first explained to them how they need to keep their arms stretched out through the ball, and keep his wrists flat, help keep the face closed more, or bowed, flat or bowed, and keeping his arms straight, help keep the radius constant so he can keep hitting the ground in the same spot. The pattern that you would have a tendency to see on the left with a golfer that looks like this, they might go good shot, top, top, thin, fat, top, good shot. So the pattern's very chaotic, and you can see that by how the arms are flexing, changing the radius, how the hips are back and down, weight's too far behind the ball. So the first thing I wanted to do was get the arms straight so he keep hitting the ground and getting his wrist flat, like I said, to keep the face closed. Then the second thing I did was, as he hit the ball, I wanted to feel like his hips were raising up. So I kept saying belt high, raise the belt up, and keep stretching your arms out and pushing it away from you. Now, I actually have a video. It's not of this golfer, but it's of a drill Mike and I do from time to time. And you can see how this drill really helps get the picture right. So here's a picture. This is a picture of my good buddy, Josh Peterson. Not sure why it's not playing. Here we go. So Mike, what do you call this drill?
Well, I used to call it swing hard, stop fast. I changed the name of it. It's now my COVID-19 drill because I'm telling everybody on the follow through, you want to social distance your hands from your stomach. That's, me trying to make things light. It's my last, I swear to God, it's my last comment about this pandemic.
So this was the practice that I did with that golfer. Just wanted to see it, show it from like a good player. So here he's feeling like his body, just wanting to focus his body, how his hips are really raising up through the ball. See the hips are raising and how his arms are staying stretched out. His wrists, if anything, this is overdone. It's a drill, but it's the feel. And I wanted to use this picture to show this is the drill that I used to help get this golfer to look like this over on the right. Any more comments you want to add to that?
Stevie knows how I feel, and any of you know me, and a couple of guys I've talked golf swing wise. I believe this is the most important part of the golf swing is the through swing. So if I can fix my average golfer's through swing,
absolutely,
and it involves a couple things: wrist conditions, which we just talked about, and then hip extension. To me, hip extension helps you extend your arms. So I believe that you have to move your hips forward. I know there's people that say you don't, but I'm not going to get into debating it, but your hips have to slide forward. And the word I use all the time, Stevie already used it, belt line high, belt line high. I mean, I use one of those bender balls and I'll put it in front of the golfer about 6 inches and I'll raise it up above his belt line the way it is it's set up. And all I ask him to do is put your belt buckle on that ball, okay, at finish. That makes him extend his hips and swing his arms out. So not only do I believe that helps, obviously your through swing, I believe that helps impact. I really do. I mean, I see huge improvements on a player's impact by extending their hips.
Through, right?
I'm sorry?
By fixing the follow through.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, when I work on impact, I work on the first half of the through swing. I really do. That's what helps the impact position. But yeah, hips extending, hips forward, arms straight. I don't know how many times a day I say that. I mean, I say it all the time.
Yeah, and we can't hammer this point down enough. It's a very common pattern that we see every day. And we're going to go through a bunch of pictures right now. That's why I said these last couple, 3 things are all going to be kind of intertwined together with the hips, the arms and wrists.
And I want to say one thing, Stevie, just because I know there's people out there that know a lot about the golf swing. So I'm already thinking what's in their mind. Remember, we're working with a pattern of an over-the-top swinger. So yes, we are going to promote hip slide. I know there's that new theory out there that you don't slide early, you slide late. My experience, I know Stevie agrees.
Patrick, interesting concept for outings. What are you thinking that's going to happen after this reopening, hopefully soon? Well, a couple things I keep seeing about this.
Hey, I was actually enjoying that. I wanted to hear what we're going to do with outings once we reopen. So,
Matt, are we good?
We good, Matt?
Yeah, somebody was just unmuted.
Okay.
I kind of liked it. Maybe I'm going to learn something. So, I mean, I lost my train of thought. I know we're talking about hip extensions.
Yeah. We'll go to the next one.
But just go on because I forget what I was going to say.
This is another picture that Mike and I did with a lady during one of our golf schools. Once again, very similar to the last picture. we attack this a little bit differently. And I want to go through on the left. Obviously, you see how bent the arms are in the blue and how the butt of the club is close to the stomach. The other point I want to make is you see how there's yellow arrows pointing the head down. And you can see obviously that the hips and the weight are a little back by the red arrows. Too much weight on the back, arms are too bent, head's a little bit too down through the ball, or too flexed, as we like to call it. It's a very common pattern. Not enough club head speed, can't hit the ball high or far, especially with the driver. As you go across the page, the big thing here that we did with this student is we put an alignment rod or a shaft by her left ear where that yellow arrow is, feeling that her head had to be back bent, or she's backing up away from the target. And that extension of the neck and the upper part of the thoracic, like Mike was just saying, there's a back bending that happens away from the target, and that back bend helps facilitate the stretching out of the arms through the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a force that's going away from the target back, and you have a force that's going forward with the butt of the club and the arms pushing away. And that helps stretch the golfer out through the ball. Also, what helps do this, as Mike was just saying, is the hips being high and pushed more forward. So they kind of go together. We'll just say the whole body, the neck, the thorax, the hips, they're extending or back bending. And as that's happening, that's allowing the golfer to push the butt of the club away from them. And the big way that we did it here in this picture was we put a shaft by her left ear. And we told her to feel like her head's backing up away from the ball as she hits it, which seems counterintuitive because we're teaching her how to really, slide and move forward. And the back bend feels like why would I want to move my head back? But in reality, what's really happening was her head was moving down and forward, we'll say a couple inches, and her feeling like her head was moving back really was keeping it centered. So I know you got some stuff to add.
Well, I mean, very similar stuff. I mean, just a little bit of it, sharing with everyone how I would do this and how we did this is the first thing I do is I put an alignment rod parallel to the ground as far in front of them as I think they can reach it by extending their arms. So obviously, if I had the alignment rod in front of her club on the left, I would have to have it within 2 feet of her for her to not miss the club.
Right.
So I put an alignment rod out there, and I said, look, hit the alignment rod. I'll make them extend it out there. Okay, so that teaches their arm extension. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll put the club next to their head, because the first thing you'll see in this progress here is you get them to extend their arms because you get their hips forward and all that stuff, but their head's going to go forward at first. It's going to look very awkward at first. Then you have to throw in, somehow stabilizing their head, whether you're going to hold it, whether you're going to put a club next to it. So somehow the stretching will come once you put something next to their head.
I think that's good to show. Why don't we share that real fast? Let's grab 2 clubs. We'll just spin this around. Did the stop sharing for a second. Here, Mike, give me explain it. I'll be the student.
So the first thing I would do is I would have an alignment rod, okay? And I would first thing, I'm in the way of the camera. The first thing I would do is I would have the alignment rod about here on the follow through. And I would say, okay, go ahead, hit a shot. And I'll hold the alignment rod small enough. I'll even sometimes use a noodle and tell them to knock the noodle out of my hand, okay? That might be more efficient. I do both. The kids love the noodle. So Stevie, or go ahead and make a swing and just
Proper or improper?
Proper first and knock this noodle flying. So that's the way I teach arm extension. And then what typically will happen, show them what will typically happen, Stevie, with you moving everything forward. That's the first thing you'll see when people try to do this. But I let them do it about 10 in a row so they can learn to feel of their arms extended. And then what I'll do is I'll do something like this. I don't know if you can see me. Can they see me way over here? So I'll keep this here, and then I'll put this here. Right about there.
So that helps the golfer feel like they're extending their neck and thorax away from the target. And that extension back, that back bend, helps the golfer shoot their arms out away from them coming through the ball.
Creates a lot of power too, by the way.
Right.
So that's kind of how I teach it. And like I said to you, right or wrong, that's one of the things I feel is the most important, is the teaching that through swing element.
Okay. All right. Next one, Mike, back to your buddy.
Who we got, Cy? Look at the difference in size extension on the right. I mean, that's, and that was a shot, right, Stevie, on the right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he hit that.
I know the Cy shot 83. Now, I got to tell you what, I don't want to bore you. So I don't think Cy's, I guess he's broke 100 a few times. But for the most part, Cy shot 83, what, a couple weeks ago before we closed New Jersey down?
Yeah, and the point I like keep hammering down is here's a guy that doesn't exercise, smokes a lot of cigarettes, isn't in the best shape at all, but showing them how to coordinate a couple of parts properly, show them how to extend and back bend their neck and their spine. It helps to make the process go along a little bit faster. Yeah. Just by throwing it out off there, oh, I'm not coordinated enough, I'm not flexible enough. That's why we have the camera and we have these pictures and we can show them how to do their practice right for the progress. So extremely similar to the last two pictures. This just went a little bit farther into the swing, where I told him to feel like two things: keep pushing his hips forward or away from this red line. And then I told him have the shaft here, having his neck back bent to create a little bit of a extension, not a lot of extension in his thorax, which helps him slingshot his arms and push his arms away from his body. It's going to help him shallow out the angle of attack with his driver. It's going to help him hit the ball higher and farther with longer clubs. And he had a tendency to hit, I think it was about 11, 12 degrees across the ball. And with the driver hit, I think it was like 5 down, 4 to 6 down, we'll say. And by doing this, the extension, the stretching, that's shallowing out the angle of attack. It's helping him swing faster, and it's helping him hit the ball farther. So once again, just by, you can do one solution that can help knock out two problems.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have anything intelligent to add to that. I just use a phrase that might help. I don't know. I use a phrase, I've been using it for many, many years. At finish, your belt buckle should be in front of your buttons. So the belt buckle's in front of the buttons on your shirt. That's extending and your spine. And at times we have to put the club out there to keep their neck tilts correct. But yeah, I mean, Stevie, that was a great explanation. I don't have anything to add. That's awesome.
Helps facilitate. Putting that shaft there is huge.
Yeah, well, like you call it, controlling the environment.
Right. Okay. Go to the next one. So now I want to show a picture. So we just showed it real quick. We just did all these pictures showing how to see it from the caddy view. Now showing how to see this from the down the line view. So this is another golf school Mike and I did a couple years ago. Golfer on the left. A couple things to see. You can really see in the upper part of his thoracic how he's like bent down. His hips are back, as evidenced by the right foot being on the ground a little bit. And you can see how low the shaft is. See how the height of the handle is like below his belt line? That's the shaft lowering or going across the ball. Chronic slicer. So what we did for this golfer is we put a basket right here on the ground, and I had Mike hold a shaft up by his neck for him to feel like the back bend. And we'll call this like step 2 of the extension piece. So by putting this basket here, had him feel like as he was hitting the ball, he was like uncocking the club or raising the handle upwards, help him swing more out to the right in conjunction with the extension of the neck and the spine through the ball. So another way just to attack the problem was, like I said, put the basket down, help them swing more out to the right to draw the ball, adding in a little bit more side tilt and extension from the front view. So you can see how his right hip's actually lower than his left, tilting the hips through the ball, and how the right foot's more off the ground. So his hips are slid more forward, the body's extended more, and that's helping him swing more out to the right, hit the ball higher and farther, and then having this basket here, it's helping him raise the shaft through the ball. This was like an exaggerated practice swing. It's a little bit overdone, but you can see how it's a big glaring difference from the first picture that we took in the morning during our golf school.
Great improvement with that gentleman. I remember him.
Yeah. Anything you want to comment to that?
No, I mean, I think you covered it all. I mean, it's a matter of changing the pattern of the guys, basically his hand path. But a lot of it, you have to have the body in the correct position. I mean, I know that somebody might think you can just change the hand path. Well, here, let's go on the flight scope or the TrackMan and let's get a right path. Unfortunately, if it was that simple, nobody would need us. So, I mean, you have to get the body in position, and the hip slide, I think, is important to get people swinging right. I mean, you don't have to have hip slide for people that already swing to the right. You don't got to teach that as much. Okay, there's different ways to teach different students, but remember, we're focusing on this pattern. So, yeah, I would get him to slide his hips. You explained it all, Stevie. Good job.
Yep.
Remember, everybody, if you have questions and you want to jump in, or just write them down at the end.
I think we have maybe one more. I want to do that one. Yeah, I want to do this one. Okay. So from the front, this is just another way that Mike and I will do the wrists. This is more just showing the wrist and a little bit of the body turning and extending. So we touched on the wrist a little bit before, how we would do it like on the backswing. And we talked about how there need to be a little more palmar flexion or bowing of the left wrist. Now this coming through the ball on the left part of the screen, you can see how the butt of the club's very, very close to his left leg. And there's a lot of cupping and some rolling coming through the ball here. You can see as it progresses through, the butt of the club gets farther away from the body, and the left arm and the shaft are almost in a straight line in the last picture. So what I did here with this golfer is, as he hit the ball, I kept telling him to feel like he's uncocking or ulnar deviating his right wrist and bowing his right wrist at the same time to help keep the face closed to the path. And as he kept uncocking the club, I kept telling him to feel like his right arm would stay above the shaft, and that would help keep the handle more forward and also keep stabilizing the wrist. So like Mike was saying earlier, a lot of the times to help correct a faulty impact, we'll touch on the follow through. And in this case, we were touching on the wrist, how the wrist worked through the ball, and also how the body needed to keep extending and turning coming through the ball. Anything you want to add? Keep adding to that?
You did a good job with explaining that, but that's kind of the progress you'll see, everybody.
It's a little more advanced.
Yeah. The wrist angles are really important.
Right, that was the point.
Both wrist angles, but I focus a lot on the lead wrist. I mean, this kid, obviously his kid's lefty's right wrist, but I focus a lot on that and, the palmar flexion and, I won't get into the ulnar and all that deviation stuff, but yeah, this kid, I know you work with his wrists a little bit and extending the arms and the hips.
Yep.
I mean, and the thing I'll point out is everybody looks at this picture on the left. Okay, you can see the kid's early extended. I don't know, did you talk to him about anything for early extension? Because it's changed a bunch.
A little bit.
Yeah, I mean.
The pattern here was just more impact wasn't very good, a lot of mishits, and a lot of weak shots out to the left. Mainly it was just the contact here, and just explaining how the wrist needed to work through the ball for him by feeling like he had the right wrist more uncocked or bowed, and that would help keep raising the shaft through the ball, make the path go out longer, and keep the face closed to the path longer through the ball to increase the ball speed, to reduce the spin, and to reduce the leftward missing shots. So like I said, just doing a couple parts on the wrist, the uncocking, and keep extending the body and turning like we've talked about before with some of the other golfers. This is just adding some more detail onto the wrist going through the ball.
Mm-hmm. No, good explanation. I think you covered it there. That's excellent.
John Rudolph just asked, what pre-shot fundamentals do you find yourselves working on as a theme with over-the-top students?
Pre-shot fundamentals?
You may take it.
Yeah, I'll comment later.
Yeah, so there'd be a couple things that I would be looking at, at the setup, and I wish we had some more time, we could really go into it. So there'd be a few things I'd be looking at. I'd be looking at making sure that the handles forward are leaning towards the left. That would help make the path of the swing go a little more into out. The other thing I'd be looking at is making sure that the face is already close to the shaft by how the grip is. making sure that, say, there's like a little bit more bowing of the left wrist at the setup. So I'd say the handle forward, a little bit of bowing of the left wrist to keep the face close to the path. That helps them get that sensation of, like Mike was saying earlier, of turning the club down as they swing back. Then lastly, from down the line, I'd be making sure that their right shoulder is pushed back and that their right arm is bent. I use Bryson DeChambeau a lot from a down the line view because I think he sets up really good for someone that likes to draw the ball. How he has his right arm really bent almost on the same plane as the shaft, and you can see how closed his shoulders are at the setup. So the combination of the handle, the wrist from the front, and the down the line with the right shoulder back, the right forearm bent, feeling like it's on the same line as the shaft at the setup. Be some pre-swing fundamentals I would do to make sure the ball curves to the left.
So, I mean, I would agree with all that, and I'll just add a couple that I look at is I want to make sure that when the golfer sets up, I mean, I think you'll all agree that probably the first thing that we see on this pattern that we're discussing, the over the toppers, is their shoulders aim left. So I'll really get them to turn their shoulders right. Okay.
Can I stop you there on that? A lot of times, Mike and I, we change grips all the time with golfers. A lot of times how their body is set up affects their grip. So we might not even touch the grip, but we know that if we start twisting the body around and moving their shoulder back and setting their forearm down, that'll start strengthening the grip. So a lot of times a grip change really is a result of what the body's doing, or sorry, an improper grip is a result of what the body's doing at the setup. So I just wanted to make that.
No, that's a good point. I mean, and I very rarely talk grip, but I'll have their grip changed by things I do with their body. So yeah, I'm a big fan of, John, to answer your question. The number one thing I would do pre-shot is I'd make sure their shoulders are actually pointing further right than what I would normally want them to be, because I want to exaggerate the change from the way left shoulders. And then I'm a big fan of right arm in. I mean, I have a device I use. I won't turn the camera around, but I have a way I can keep an alignment rod between their arms so the right arm can stay closer to the body. So I'm a big fan, right arm closer to the body at setup and shoulders to the right. And that you'll see that immediately with the TrackMan. I mean, if you just did that, their path's going to get less to the left. It's not the answer. It's not the entire answer, but it's a good first step. So I hope that answers your question.
Any other? We're going to leave it open now to like some questions. This is pretty much covers the end of the stuff that we had to talk about. So if anyone has any other questions on any of the stuff we've done or any other patterns, we will be more than happy to answer any of them.
Yeah, I would love to get a bunch of questions, because I know maybe some of you are thinking about your own swing personally, and most of you, I'm sure, are not under this pattern. I mean, I can get into length, John. If you want to get into discussion now about ground forces, I'd be happy to have that discussion. Okay. I just don't think ground forces is appropriate in this for this pattern. I mean, I would not address ground forces. We're being spied upon.
Hello, Mike.
Yes.
Mike, can you hear me?
I can.
Johnny C.
Johnny C.
First of all, you and Steve worked beautifully together, man. It's a great team you got there. I'll be very quick here. You've opened up some doors for me today, and one of the things that you mentioned, Mike, was knuckles down, logo down going through, and I use that. You showed me that before. I use that, but I use it mostly on the downswing, because when I monkey around with it on the backswing, sometimes it's my mistake that the student increases the pressure in his left hand, and it's hard to see that, and then they experience trouble that way. So I like to use your knuckles down on the downswing. The other thing is when Stevie, when you were swinging that club, and Mike, you were holding the tube, all I could see was Dave Quinn. I swear, it flashed back, and I seen Quinny with that position in there. And I think the things that you covered today are not only going to make the ball stop slicing, it's going to create answers for students, whereas they say, oh, Johnny C, show me, I wanted to delay the hit. I don't believe about delay the hit. I think that what you've created from the inside is creating a hit on time. It's now on time, and that's because it's later, they call it delayed, but it's really on time now. So I want to thank you, and you and Steve are great. Okay, and let me unmute here.
Thanks, Johnny. We can actually, if everybody we can actually stop sharing and give you some demonstrations of some of the things we do. If anybody wants to ask about, underneath, and if you want to talk about ground forces, I'd rather not, but you can. Not that I'm against it. I'm just, I can talk about it. I know a lot about them. So, but yeah, just if you want to ask more questions, we can stop sharing. I can show you some of the drills that we use to accomplish what we're talking about. Anybody have anything?
Chris McDonald just asked if you use the term stack and tilt to help your students understand the centered turn on the backswing.
I use the word tilt all the time. I don't ever use the word stack. Hope that answers your question. Any other questions? So let's stop sharing. Let's have some fun. We're set up here in the studio so we can hit some.
I don't know. Jeff Surratt just asked, who's the best executive director that you teach?
The best executive director I teach? Well, I guess I have to say Jeffrey, huh? Because he's a member of mine now, so I got to be really careful. I mean, he might get me fired. Yeah. So let's stop. Matt, you okay if we stop sharing? I want to just go over some things that we can do with our students in the way of drills and stuff. You heard us talk about them, so let's you got it?
Yeah, we're good.
And come on, everybody, we need some questions. Let's start making this interactive. It's a lot more fun. I could stay forever talking about the golf swing.
Yeah, and folks, feel free to unmute yourself just to ask questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do that if you.
Okay. Just no comments about social distancing, please. I've heard it enough. So listen, so we talk a lot about the pattern that we're referring to today. A couple things I'm going to add to it that we didn't talk about, I know Stevie would agree, is I think one of the things that you can do, and I would put this as the next step. I mean, everything we discussed would be priority one, but I'm a big believer in elbows together, because as the upper elbows separate when you go back, that brings the club down too steep, okay, which is going to make the club go to the top. So I'm a big believer of getting to squeeze their elbows. So, I mean, I have all kinds of devices I'm not going to get out, okay, but this is the best one. I got to encourage you to all buy one of these. I have no idea. I'm not getting a kickback. This thing's tremendous because it allows you to actually put pressure in coming down. I don't know the name of it. LC1, it looks like. Wasn't expensive, but you can strap it to your elbows. It's a tremendous device to get your elbows together, which, believe it or not, if you can get this right elbow to do this, you're going to get the shaft shallow. Okay. That's just something to think about to help this pattern. Stevie, you have any comments on that?
No.
You agree?
We'll go more with the preset fundamentals to start drawing.
Yeah, the preset fundamentals that John asked about would be this.
We'll face the error, yeah.
Okay, and this.
Get in there and start twisting.
Yeah, pushing that, getting that shoulder back. That's the pre-shot stuff, the only pre-shots I would do. I'd like to know what John would do, pre-shots. Come on, John, unmute, let us know. So go ahead.
Can you hear me, Mike?
I can.
So I guess I was kind of, things I see a lot in my teaching, I would say would be, I often see too upright of a posture situation for the over-the-top player, and I feel like they don't have the room. So again, I was just trying to get, your thoughts and see thoughts on other things that you were noticing, just trying to get more information.
No, I agree with that. I think if you move them further from the ball, you have a better chance of that. No, I absolutely agree.
The other thing I was curious about, just wanted to ask about, because I love the low point focus. I focus on that. I always focus on contact first, then direction, and then distance with people. Just your favorite drills for low point that you like to use.
You want to give a couple? So what, I can't really probably hit a ball because you won't see from down the line.
Face the TV.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this way, and if I hit it, I'll hit my play scope screen, so I won't do that. Okay, I mean, I do a couple things, John. I mean, I like, if I really have somebody struggling, I mean, I won't hesitate to have him hit balls like this at all. Okay, it does a couple things. Gets the right hip out of the way, number one, and it's going to keep him centered. So that if I really have a guy having trouble hitting it solid, I'll go to that drill. I mean, that's an old school drill. We've been using that. I've been doing this 45 years. I was using that the first year I taught. So that helps control low point. Okay. Other drills that I do, I mean, and I know you may not agree with this, but to control low point, I work on through swing. If I can get this relationship here, I've controlled low point. Remember, again, you and I might differ on how we accomplish controlling low point. I think the hips have to slide, especially for these golfers. I think low point happens under the center of mass. So if you don't get it moving up here, I don't think you're going to control low point. So that's kind of what I would do. So I would do things like, Stevie, put your club here, right here. So I'll have people hit balls where I put a club about 6 to 8 inches in front of my belt line, okay? And then I'll have them up there like that. I actually use this, so it would be like this. This is my favorite one, John, for this. Okay, if I'm trying to control low point, this is going to be about right there, and I'm going to have them hit a shot, and I'm going to have them put their belt buckle on the ball.
Same thing as like yourself.
I'm going to fall over.
You hold the shaft right on their belt line at the
Could
center.
do that too.
And they feel like they're higher when they finish.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I control low point. I really control low point through swing. Although if I have somebody really struggling, I'll go with the one leg drill. What do you do?
Yeah, a variety of things. You know, I like to put a towel, probably about a club head width behind the ball, you know, for iron shots, and then, you know, have them make some practice swings where they're missing the towel. I mean, I've always been, I guess, an instructor. I love this. I love teaching more slide and less turn. You know, on the downswing, I feel like a lot of people turn too early, and without that slide towards the target, even if it becomes too much and maybe creates, you know, a different ball flight pattern than's desired at the given time. I mean, if you can get somebody making better contact, I mean, I think that's what it's all about. So, yeah, I was looking for more ideas and stuff like that. So I appreciate it.
You're controlling the environment, as Stevie calls it. Put the towel behind it, that's great. I mean, get people to do that. I mean, yeah, I mean, we do a lot. I use a rope, but you know, I'll take them on the range with the ropes where we're controlling where people practice from, and I'll make them hit a golf ball from 10 inches in front of the rope. So that'll help control their swing bottom, you know. But
yeah, I'm excited to try out some of the forward swing after impact ideas that you have. I like it.
well, I mean, I'm a big believer. I'll show you the drill I use all the time. I mean, if you come to my range at Burlington on a Saturday, you're going to see 20 people do this, hitting balls, and probably all at the same time, because I give this drill to all my students. Is I'll have them hit golf balls, and when I say swing hard, stop fast, I mean swing hard, stop fast. I don't want it to look like, okay, I'm going to go like this and like that. I don't want that. That's not doing them any good because it's not realistic. It's not in the sequence that they're swinging. So I'll have them hit shots where it'll be like this. And I'll have them stop right here. And there's certain keys I'm going to make sure I point out to them. I want the hips to turn. I want them forward. And you'll find if you use that drill, one of the things I find is the more they push their hips forward and high, the easier it is to keep the arms extended. Well, and turn, of course, but okay. So that's the one I use all the time, John. Go ahead,
That's
Steve.
great. Thanks, Mike.
I'm talking too much.
I'm good with that. Anything else?
Okay, so I mean, some of the things that we might do. I mean, Stevie, why don't you hit a shot and we'll show them. Go ahead and hit a shot into the net. Okay, we'll kind of show them. We were talking about neck tilts and how we, because I know that sounds technical, and I don't use that word with my students, but it helps them not swing over the top. So it's just simple as holding the club here. Okay, we do this all the time.
Like it's flexion.
Yeah.
We move the club out.
Yeah.
Extension.
Yeah.
Keep the club in.
Yeah. So we do this a lot. This helps get the golfer swinging less over the top.
Just knock it out.
Yeah, not bad. And then the other one that you saw, I don't know, we were talking about it, and I assume everyone knew what we were doing, but here's the first thing I do with someone that's coming over the top. I mean, I'll stand here like this. and we'll hit ball after ball. Okay, and I want them to hit it pretty full speed. I'll start them a little slow because I want them to break. Well, I don't use my club either. Steve, remember this is my club. So I do this like this, and that gets them keeping their left arm in, swinging down under the plane. We'll call it. I think that works. So that's how I get under the. Yeah. What else? What else would be helpful?
From the front, if he asked me about impact, a couple of the impact drills, is that what he said?
How to control open.
Yeah. I would say from the front view, if you had your setup, you keep the left arm ahead of the shaft, at the setup. And then when you finish, I'd show from this view, when I finish, my arms are parallel to the ground, my left arm is still ahead of the shaft, keeping this alignment, right? To get rid of the bending and the cupping. So you see poor players hit, they have their arm behind the shaft, and when they would come through, their arm would be behind the shaft.
Yeah. So you might do something in it like maybe swing hard, stop fast.
Well, I mean, the same thing you did. Prop them up,
Yeah.
and then have them just chip the ball out, keeping your left arm.
And then just really focus on this stuff right there. Yeah.
Just to get.
Keeping the club head outside your hands. Yeah, that'll control low point a little bit. That'll also help impact. Anybody have any other questions? We're running out of material here. Pardon? Well, I got a lot of material, but I don't want to bore you. I don't know how long we're, Jeffrey or Matt, how long are we supposed to do this? I can go on and on.
Oh, yeah. Your call, and I guess it depends on if we get more questions or not.
I'm sorry?
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
I got a question. Like, so sometimes when I get the brand new kids out that really can't really find the bottom, particularly people that are big chested and they moving back and forth all over, I'll have them hit with their feet together and just tell them to get that belt buckle towards the target. And a lot of times that they'll find the low point pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a good drill. Feet together. Yeah, and the other thing I find with feet together, don't you find that it helps their hip turn a little bit too?
Yeah, it helps their hip turn, and they figure it out too. If they start topping the ball a little bit, they'll start figuring, well, I got to swing down a little bit lower. And then once they find that low point and they start hitting the ball a little more solid, then you can kind of work with their feet a little wider and see where they're that point of where you start losing it, you know?
Yeah, no, I like that as a drill. I mean, what I kind of do to help with
Very
that.
similar to the one you have where you put your foot back, which I like too, which is.
Yeah. But what I do a little bit with some of the kids is, you know, I'll have alignment rods cut in half and I'll put them right here when they set their stance up, and I'll hit balls that way with no sweat.
Other times I'll also put like a tee in front of the ball and tell them, listen, get that tee from out in front of the ball so they get a better angle of attack.
That's good. Thanks for the question, or actually, thanks for the info. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. You guys have been great.
Nobody. Matt, what do you want us to do? You want me to start talking under the plane?
You guys can run with it, or you know, if there's no questions, it's up to you guys.
Hey, I got one more thing. A lot of what I use is a lot of toe up to toe up, and try to get people to really just use their body to get the toe up to toe up. It really feels like how they can square the face with their body more.
Well, I mean, my only concern with a toe up to toe up is most of the people that have this pattern we were discussing today are already open with the face. So I'll teach them toe down. I mean, I'll really get them to do this, you know?
Yeah, well, the face is, yeah, exactly.
So here's my,
yeah, I meant a little bit more with the faces actually, yeah, more close to the spine at the bottom.
so when you do toe up, I'm sorry. I mean, I prefer this. You see can you guys all see my black oval there? I try to get them to do that, where they can't see the oval. That's what I call my knuckles down, you know. I'll have them do it on the downswing mostly, but if we're talking backswing, I'll do that. Yeah, it helps the pattern.
We're talking.
Right, the one we're specifically talking about, the over the toppers. I wouldn't do that with a guy that gets underneath it, but okay.
Yep.
Anybody else have questions?
Yeah, there is Don Roberts just asked, would love a few thoughts on helping the underplane on downswing.
Okay. So this could, I mean, we could talk about this for like 6 hours, you know.
Well, let's do here.
So,
We'll start with these.
I mean, we'll try to stay somewhat basic. Okay, but as if you saw what we were doing for the over the top guy, I don't know how Steve, I know how Stevie would do it for the most part. I focus mostly on through swing. You know, I have a story, I won't use names. I have a guy that's a buddy of mine that was hitting the ball, and we were talking about shot shape. He's way under, he's hitting a lot of overdraws on blocks, you know, and he's talking backswing. All this, I'm gonna make it a long story short. I said, look, let's just work on the through swing. Let's get the club to swing around the bend. You can swing the club from here if you can exit over here, and you'll have a perfect shot. So, I mean, I'm a big through swing guy to fix underneath, so I don't know who's asking the question, but go ahead.
So when we made that diagram earlier with the guy with his left arm too far out, and I had those couple of arrows on the ground, I had black and orange, blue, and yellow, where the left arm would be when it's parallel to the ground, I would just go ahead and do that again on the front side of the swing. So I would put like a shaft down on the ground. Let's say it's inside Mike's stance line, let's just say 30 degrees. And by the time Mike's arm is parallel to the ground, it should be on top of this 30-degree stick. So here's his stance line at 0. And the right arm would be on top of this stick inside a stance 30 degrees. And the other thing I would do is I would take a shaft.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I do all the time.
I would hold a shaft
Right there.
right here, and I have to make sure as he hits, he keeps making sure he keeps turning and keeps his arm and his hands down. And the turning and keeping his arms and the hands down will help start bringing the club more around the corner, as opposed to the good player tilting back, swinging too far to the right, having their exit too high. The first thing I'd be looking at, where's their exit? I'm making sure they keep turning, keep their arm and their hands down so the exit's underneath their right shoulder coming through the ball. That would help them stop swinging too far in and out. That'd be like one of the first steps I'd be looking at.
Yeah. I mean, and there's where, you know, I don't want to get in too much discussion into pressure, but that's a way you can get someone to swing left, is get the pressure to go more left and behind. You know, I hate to use the word behind with golf, but we're going to assume that most golfers that are trapped underneath are good players and they'll find contact. So I would emphasize less hip slide with that person and more rotation. But that's so rare. I mean, how many lessons do we give? You know, we work with some good players. We talk a little bit about that, but for the most part, those are dangerous things to say to the average golfer, right? Yeah, I mean, I have them slide less and I have them open up faster. That's the first thing I'll do, because if you can control through swing, you know, I don't know if you all agree with this, and I'd love comments for those of you out there that would disagree with me, because I love discussing it. I don't care if the golfer's shaft angle's that far underneath coming down. I mean, I can emphasize, I can pick one guy right now, Sergio Garcia does pretty good, but Sergio then exits on the circle over here. Okay, pardon? Matches it up. So, you know, if you match it up, you don't have to fix this. I mean, I know there's so many different theories on downswing, whether it's forearm rotation to get the shaft. I don't ever focus on that usually unless I can't get the golfer to do this. Okay, and that's with the correct props and controlling the environment, you can make that happen like that. Okay. Any other questions? I mean, I don't want to get too involved with pressure and how you change the underneath path through, how you move your pressure points and stuff like that. That can get dicey and you get into some length.
Hey, Mike, I got a question for you. Probably the toughest students I have are the heavy set, big chested woman comes out, or the big construction guy with the arms that are 34 and 32 inches long, and just have that tough time trying to just stay centered and really get them to move correctly. What do you suggest for like some of your best fundamentals in trying to keep them centered and to get them some extension through the shot? I find that's the hardest thing with them.
I would,
Do you mean on the
on the
extension,
backswing, I'm assuming you're talking
or the
about, right?
follow through?
Well, backswing, just to keep them centered, first of all, which I usually try and start with maybe feet together to give them a bottom and then work from there and work on their mobility. But I mean, just solid contact, you know, it's hard. They're probably the toughest ones that I've ever seen when they come
Yeah,
through me.
I would do, there would be two things that I would start with the lower center first, keeping the pelvis stable. I would work on how their knee flexes. Make sure that the left bends down, the right straightens, like a steering column up and down. That would help keep the hips centered, so there'd be like no sway. That'd be one of the first things I'd be doing. Left knee would bend down, right would straighten. That helps keep the hips centered. That'd be number one. And the second thing I'd look at,
I want to show, this is the same thing, you're going to make a swing here. You can't do it and hit a shot because you wouldn't see it very correctly. But what I would do, and it's the same thing Steve talking about, I have players hit balls and I'm down here, okay? And I hold this stick right there. And I say, okay, when you hit this shot, I want you to go to the top, and I want some space between the rod. There you go. So that's basically the tailbone moving toward the target as you rotate.
that'd be the lower center. That'd be how to keep the lower center stable.
And then the upper center, Stevie, what would you do?
The upper center, I would just be making sure if their head's going down into the right, they're turning while staying bent over. So they're turning faster than they're tilting and extending. So I'd be looking at what the head's doing. So typically the left shoulder moves too level to the ground, the head goes down to the right. So if Mike came over here and flopped me over, okay,
This is what I do. I go like this.
Mike would flop me over. There's the feeling of
I create this angle and I pull the shoulder
of the
forward.
side and the extension. So keep the center of the shoulder turn stable. I'll be feeling like the left shoulder's going down more. And as I'm going down, I'll be feeling like I'm extending and tilting. It might be feeling like their head's going up and to the left, but when done properly, they're just doing a center pivot. So I'd combine the lower half and the upper half just to keep the axis stable.
Yeah, the other thing that like I showed you guys earlier when we did flip the camera, is I use a lot of controlling the centers and have them turn up toward the ceiling, we'll say. So, I mean, I'll try to get them to feel the two centers, both the hips, and if you put this on video, you're gonna see their head goes up when they do this. That's quite all right. It's okay if there's a little bit of, I hate to use that buzzword, spine angle, but you can change your spine angle and hit good shots. Yeah, it's supposed to. But, so I try to get this and this to my students to turn up. Okay.
Well, it looks like a lot of weight on the right at the top, though. I'm just not used to that.
Probably mean.
I think the camera will be spun around.
The camera needs to
It could be spun around.
Well, the comment I usually get from that is, oh, that's too much weight on the left side.
Right.
And remember, I'm trying to create an exaggerated feel. It might be, I mean, this might be too much weight on the left side, but I'm trying to create an exaggerated feel. So,
To answer your question, how to stay centered.
yeah, I'm just trying to get you to stay centered. So is there more weight left? Sure. You know how I get weight off the left? Have them turn the right hip more and deeper. That'll get the weight off the left. So does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Greg Atani just asked, in most situations for the poor player, will your grip change first or risk conditions through the swing?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the grip can change the wrist conditions a little bit. I don't use grip. That's just my opinion. I mean, I'm a big fan of controlling. That's why I put this glove on, so I'll talk about it a little bit. Controlling the knuckles of the left hand. I mean, if we get somebody that's really bad, I'll try to get him there at the top. John Rahm will say, okay, if I have someone that is able to feel as they come down, making the knuckles turn down, I'm exaggerating, you know, the palm reflection, whatever you want to call it, bowing, okay? So I work with these, I'm always painting on people's gloves. That's the old school in me. I do that all the time. I ruin a lot of gloves, but I sell gloves, okay? So when they come down, I paint this little thing there, and I want them to make that disappear as they come down. Now, if you look at that face from there, can they see this?
Yeah.
Look how close that is.
Up
A little higher. Look how close that is. Okay, if you can get your students to do that, they're done slicing. They're going to hit some left for a while, but that's okay. Don't like that. Any other questions? Everybody follow wrist conditions? I mean, I think it's very important. I mean, I really do. I mean, really getting this coming down, okay? And then when you come through, really keeping it. I mean, I have my students hit shots where they stop. It might be a little slower shot, slower speed, but I'll have them hit shots where I want them to finish with the club head way underneath the hands. That increases your handle forward, your flex. And I don't know if you guys all saw that, but that's a great drill for your students. You know, just going back and keep the handle underneath the hands. See what I mean? Handle under hands. I do that a lot with students to get the face square. Okay.
Joe Kogelman just asked, wouldn't that help them move their low point over all forward at impact, moving their weight forward at the top?
Say it one more time. Say that
Say it one more time.
Wouldn't that help them move their low point over all forward at impact, moving their weight more forward at the top?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Sure. I mean, the more the weight's forward, the more low points forward. And that's, I'm assuming that's what Joe's asking.
Yeah.
Would that help them draw the ball?
Turn off mute, Joe, and just ask us. Well, I can't believe everybody's afraid to turn off the mute button and ask. We could have a blast. These are the old days. We should have a cigar and a nice glass of scotch. We could just talk golf swing all day here. What else are we going to do? We can't play golf. Can't get close to anybody.
If you need assistance turning your mic on, there's a button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a little round icon that'll look red, like a red microphone. You click that, it'll turn your microphone back on.
I mean, I know it's boring just sitting here listening to us talk, so let's get some interaction here. Somebody tell me that you don't agree with anything I said, and let's have a discussion.
Hey,
Why he's having mic issues.
Hey, Michael, it's Jeffrey.
Jeffrey.
So on some of the things that you worked on with me, like one of my challenges was I started to get going too far out and handle too far up.
Yep.
And we worked almost on the opposite. So you want to talk a little bit about, like, when you obviously a lot of the conversation today was around core, around beginning players, but when you start to work with, players that have been playing for a little while and maybe working it the other way a little bit if you have to.
Well, yeah, I mean, we touched on that briefly, Jeffrey, but I mean, with Jeffrey had a golf swing that he swung from the inside, okay, and then his vertical shaft plane went like crazy up. I mean, like way up. So he was doing this, okay, and that creates a very unstable phase path, a whole bit. So what we did with Jeffrey is we just tried to, this sounds too technical. I don't like to ever sound technical, but we just had an exit lower and left. Now that lowered his vertical shaft plane, but I mean, that allowed him to swing around the bend. I'm sorry? That goes together. I mean, and Stevie asked, did he extend too fast? Well, I think, Jeffrey, you did extend too fast. There's no question. But that's because, I mean, the momentum of the swing with you doing that, you didn't have a choice. I mean, can you imagine trying to keep your pelvis and go like this? I mean, you might have to be in traction.
So, Jeff, what was your question again?
So when you're working with a player, and my mistake became either an overdraw or a block, depending on what I did with the face. So so some of the easy drill that Mike and I had was kind of handle low, arms go left, versus working with newer players where you're trying to get them to swing out.
Yes.
So I would say two things to that. I would control your tilts. And the first thing I do, if Mike puts a shaft in my head from down the line, in a better player's case who swings too far to the right, as they're hitting, just keep it there. They might extend or pop off this wall a little bit too fast, and that would effectively have the shaft raising up. So one of the first things Mike and I would do is put a shaft on the golfer's head, and as they hit, they'd be turning and staying bent over, staying tilted over with the upper part of their spine, their shoulders. That staying in your tilt or staying in your inclination to the ground would help keep the shaft exiting lower to make the swing direction straighter. That'd be the first thing.
Give them ear thing.
Yeah, and a good feel for that is what we've told players is feel like your right ear's to the ground, and your neck's tilted to the right through the ball. Would help keep the exit down and not swing so far to the right. That'd be the first thing. And then the second thing, I know Mike and I have done is to help the pelvis turn more in a circle. Is that when you do your follow through, as you turn through, you keep your head on the wall and you keep your the left side of your hip on this wall to help keep your pelvis in a tilt as well. So you're trying to control the tilt of the shoulders and the tilt of the pelvis through the ball to make the swing direction straighter. Anything you would add on to that?
Well, I mean, since you have the chair there, I said I was going to actually do this with everyone earlier. So I think, Jeffrey, that covers how we would swing left low. Okay, that helps with that for everybody. So we were talking about hip turn early in the backswing. So this is my favorite drill to get someone to pivot correctly, because I'll actually have them hit balls. Watch on the backswing. I'm going to push this chair this way. Okay. So as I go back, I'm going to push it that way, and then I'm going to finish with it on that way. You notice it's off the ground. Okay. It's not. I'm not moving my body away from the chair. I'm moving my arm. Pardon?
You are at the same time you're turning it.
Well, I'm moving it forward. I'm not moving it off the chair. So, but I mean, that's with the chair here. I wanted to show that. That's a great way to have kids practice that lose their pelvic tilt.
Yeah, their inclination.
Okay, their inclination. That will really get some feeling of rotation without their pelvis going like
tilted.
Well, it's inclination, right? Yeah, just think inclination would be this. Okay. Anybody else?
Is that Mike?
Yes.
Mike, Johnny C. That chair drill is a great drill. I'm using that. There's not many chairs available on the driving range. So what I've done, I've taken the golfer's bag, or have a small bag out there, and put a piece of PVC pipe through the big loop up in there. And then, like, in other words, if you and Steve were together, Steve could hold that alignment rod on your buttocks and keep it there. But if the student wanted to do that after you taught him, I use a piece of PVC pipe, running it through with a clamp, just a regular clamp, and they keep both cheeks on there. In fact, they do better when they push back against that, like you did. So it's a great deal. It's been a successful teaching aid for me. A piece of PVC pipe clamped onto their golf bag, and they just stick it inside the bag when they leave. But that's a great drill. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. I'm glad you're using it. It's got to help. I know it helps people. It helps them learn to pivot and create a little power in their pivot. Anything else? Anybody? Very quiet crew today. What's everybody doing? Like just sleeping?
Hey guys, I gather from some of the information that you're presenting that you're using, some technology probably that measures the path and the face as well in your teaching. Can you just tell what you're using, and then also, like, when you're really trying to dial somebody in, your better player, what kind of path and face relationships and angles are you looking for?
Well, I'll answer first, and you go, Stevie.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I use FlightScope.
On that track.
Stevie has TrackMan. I use it. So in my normal lesson, okay, I will always start in my studio here, okay, because I want to see numbers. I don't necessarily, unless I do a bunch of lessons through the winter, so then we're in here the whole time. Then we'll use the FlightScope to train a little bit of path. But for the most part, I just want to see the guys' numbers. Then we're going to go to the range, and I'm going to use video over there. That's kind of what I use my FlightScope for. Really, that's it. I mean, obviously my winter program in here, I use it exclusively. It's on. It's got a big screen TV over here to our left, and they can see their path and all the data. So I use path, face data, obviously. My preference is, and I use this phrase all the time, I don't care if you swing to the right or the left, but you can't swing more than 2 on either direction. So
Yeah.
2.0 left, 2.0 right.
To jump into that, I think to answer the question is we'll look at the swing direction mainly on the flight scope and the TrackMan to make sure that that's, like Mike said, not too far either direction, because that's a little bit different than the overall 3D path that the club path is, because there's a calculation for that. So we're really just looking at the swing direction to be fairly, I don't want to say close to 0, but just not too far off. Like for instance, like, Joe Kogelman, he might swing to the right, say 4 degrees, which is fine. 4 degrees as long as he has the face angle at a proper relationship, at a 2-to-1 relationship to that, so the ball is curving the proper way. So we'll look at the swing direction mainly, that doesn't get too far off. Like if Sai's swing direction was 12 degrees across the ball, that's way too high. Or a good player could be 8 to 10 degrees too far into out. So we'll look at that first, look at the pictures and how to change that, and then we'll look at the face's relationship to that path to just make sure that they're at a 2-to-1 relationship so that the ball's curving the right way. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, I think, Johnny, we control a lot on face path relationship. I mean, look, you're a good player. I mean, the only thing you have to do to be a good player is control your path in your face. That's really it. Create a predictable shape and then go play golf and hope it makes it putts. But yeah, so I work path and face. That's what I use my flight scope for mostly. Yeah,
I was appreciate the insight, guys. I've been working trying to get, like, most of the time path to either -3 or +3, depending on what shape my student wants to work on. But I was just curious what your thoughts on that were, so I appreciate it.
So you like to get your students right?
I like to have them, if I'm trying to get somebody to hit a draw, we're trying for that 3-degree into out path, and then I'll try and get them to hit it with an open face of 1 degree.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
2-to-1 relationship, right?
Johnny, then do you look at the descent angle, because that does affect path? Do you look at that at all?
Yeah. So again, kind of the way I always organize everything in a lesson is definitely going to be contact, then direction, and then distance. So, I'm going to look and make sure the first number I always look at with my TrackMan is the low point, and the attack angle. And then, obviously if you've got somebody that's over the top, that's going to be more out in front. Then, when you start to make that change, that if you're trying to get them to hit the draw, that's going to kind of move that back a little bit too. So you kind of have to be sensitive to what you're doing directionally. And I really want to make sure that low point, let's say I had an over the top person, if that low point was, let's say, 2 or 3 inches out in front with a 7-iron and they're over the top, I'm almost going to try and do a couple things initially to take that low point out farther, out in front of the ball, and then try to change the path a little bit. Because again, as you change that path, then you're also moving the low point.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always kind of do. I mean, even if someone comes in and they're, I'm really looking to hit a draw this year, and I've been a fader for 10 years. I try and I say, all right, I get all their information, I listen to them, and try and their goals become my goals. But at the same time, we'll get them warmed up, and then I'll let them hit 10, 12 balls and get the initial data, and then I'll just tell them, I'll say, hey, we're going to work towards your goals, but here's your worst number. And then we usually spend the lesson attacking that first number that's really the bad number. It's causing what I would say is, more strokes on the scorecard. And then within that, if we get more into, a lot of times, as students' goals are going to be not necessarily what they need initially. They might need to, get a little bit of, just better ball striking to begin with before they're able to realize, becoming that better player and being able to control their ball flight as good as they want to.
Right. Good information. Great. Thanks for the interaction, sharing with us. Anybody else?
Is it quickie?
Yes.
Well, Steve, can you go back and where I can see your feet at a face-on position? The question was asked before about like some basics And one of the things I like when I can see Steve fit, I'm having success with it with my students is instead of having the right foot straight out in a braced position, I'm finding more success with it turned out to the right. It enables me to turn and load better. My right knee catches up with at least to the foot, and it's really nice what I see there. I agree with that, and thank you.
I'll make a comment. That's a great observation. I mean, I teach all my kids to have foot flare. I mean, and I try to match it up, really. I try to make it equal. So I agree with you. You got to have foot flare. If we had time, Stevie, we're running this on my computer. Stevie has so many spectrums of pictures. He'd show you a picture of, like, I think what is, like, all like Hogan, Steve, all the really great players have a whole bunch of foot flare. But it makes the hips work better, makes it easier to stay centered, too. So, yeah, good observation, Johnny.
Takes stress off the knee joints.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Questions? I don't want to just keep talking and bore everybody. So if there's no more questions, Matt, I mean, I guess we can end this.
If anyone wants to send us an email or anything.
Yeah, if anybody, send.
Mike.
Yes.
Mike, Steve, this is not a question, but I'd like to thank you for all you did for our veterans, and Rogers over there, he pitched in, and Doug Delaney, and I'd just like to thank whoever's still online. Thanks for what you do for the vets all year. Thanks, guys.
Our pleasure. You need anything else, you let us know, okay, buddy? Yeah, I mean, so I want to thank everybody for signing in today and listening to us, and hope we helped you. And if you have questions and you didn't want to ask on this forum, send us an email, text me, call me.
Either one of us.
Yeah, I love talking golf swing. I can do it all day. I prefer doing it with a cigar.
Thanks so much for the time, boys. Really appreciate it. Awesome information. As Mike and Steve said, I think I'm not sure if their contact information was on the original email, Matt, but we can certainly send that out to everybody in case you wanted to reach out to the boys. So
Great.
Thanks, Jeff.
Jeffrey, I want to thank everybody again. Listen, stay safe. Hope we're playing golf soon.
Thanks, everybody.
See you all later.
Stay safe.
Thanks.